Everybody thinks the path of spirituality is inherently a blissful one, like blissful through and through and through and through and through. Part of the goal of following a spiritual path, after all, is to find some level of contentment and emotional ease and equanimity. Okay, that's a goal. That is not, however, what the path looks like. I'm doing my best in these videos to just compare spirituality to any other kind of discipline or skill set because I want to start thinking about it that way. Like I want to get it lodged into my mind because it gives me some perspective. But I'd say it's like if you say that if you want to be a professional skateboarder, that's if somebody were to say, "Oh, that's a path of perfectly smoothly going up and down ramps and doing cool tricks." It's like that is an end goal that you'll be able to do said cool tricks, but what does the actual path look like? It looks like a bunch of stumbling and falling and scraping and maybe a concussion or two or 10, That's, it's not as physically taxing, but the path of spirituality comes with a lot of proverbial falls and cuts and scrapes, including some amount of incredible dissatisfaction with oneself. Because when one starts pursuing the path, they pretty quickly realize just how egoically structured a lot of their goals have been up until this point in life. I mean, I know I certainly did. You realize how much of your general pursuit of your day-to-day is rooted in there's this image of myself, and I want to keep that image of myself, what I am, as strong and as high value as possible. To be just not even in an insulting way, literally self-centered. And when you start on the spiritual path and you start realizing all of those very egoic, self-centered ways that you've been living your life, it's easy for a good amount of self-deprecation to come in. Being like, man, yeah, geez, everything is just about me, isn't it? I'm so selfish, just everything is about me. What a bad person I am. If you don't have that kind of feeling, at least at some point, you've probably not taken a legit spiritual path. Although that is certainly not where you end up. You manage to transcend that along the way, but you have to go through that extreme dissatisfaction with oneself and one's ego. It's not all too uncommon for people who have had some level of awakening, reached maybe what we'd call like a low-level state of enlightenment, to have an extremely negative, pessimistic view of the world at large, sure, but also themselves. You start to realize that thing that you tried to assign so much value to, your ego, doesn't have any inherent value by any sort of objective universal standard. And there's a tendency for the feeling of hatred towards the ego to come in. But it feels like noble hatred at the time. No, this is a good kind of self-flagellation because it's in the name of some higher perspective. But that is failing to realize that there is still further to go after you get to that point. It's a very necessary place on the journey to be anti-ego. But it's an even more necessary place to be anti-nothing at all. Not for or against anything. Isn't that strange? There's almost a Dunning-Kruger effect of spirituality. Not a perfect analogy, but, they say that Neil deGrasse Tyson said it best about the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's possible to know enough about something to think that you're right, but not enough about it to know that you're wrong. Wherein you have more insight on a certain subject matter than the layman, the average person. And so you are inherently an expert who is incapable of making any mistakes on it. That's what you think. And of course that's not true. And then there's a rough sort of dissonance period you have to go through of keeping an open mind and a healthy level of skepticism about any conclusion that you draw, and a willingness to be wrong. And that's when you get to what you could truly call a place of expertise. I think spirituality can be similar, where it's possible to see enough about ego or understand enough about it to really, really not like it, but to have not been self-realized enough to transcend that hatred of the ego. You get stuck in this awkward in-between place. That's where nihilism largely comes from. Nihilism is inherently negative. I don't know what to say. I'm not a philosopher, so, somebody please argue with me about this. It's fine. But just everybody that I've known, or every perspective that I've seen that is largely rooted in what they call nihilism, it's not just there is no inherent meaning. It's like strictly an anti-meaning kind of perspective, which that has to be negative. But it's not about nihilism. We're strictly talking about ego and sense of self and everything like that. I don't want to be anti-ego, and I'm not really anymore. I've gone through phases of that in the past. But I went to a teaching by Adyashanti in the very early days of 2020, right before lockdown. So I feel extremely blessed, and I don't even think he does in-person teaching anymore. So hallelujah that I was able to go to this at the time. But one of his mic drop moments that just made everybody go was when he said, "Only the ego thinks the ego needs to be destroyed." Blew my mind. That voice that is criticizing the ego so much, hating on it so strongly, wanting it to go away, just be obliterated, is actually still just the ego in disguise. It's like a Scooby-Doo reveal. It rips off its mask, the mask of, the highest spiritual voice in the universe, rips off the mask, and then it's still just the ego. Only the ego thinks that the ego needs to be destroyed. There will always be an ego, in quotes, if you want to call it that. There will always be a relative small self with this or that attribute that one could name. And it's not about trying to get rid of that. And in fact, the more that you try to get rid of it, the more that you start coming at spirituality from a very egocentric place. It's this annoying paradox. The key to it that I've found is just to say, yes, there's a relative ego with all these relative descriptors, and it doesn't actually hold any universal weight. What is the point of hating what is effectively a fictional character? Yeah. No, this is why this stuff is hard. This is why this stuff is so incredibly hard. It's still not something that I've totally reconciled. And I still have thoughts evaluating said ego as though it were a real person. But I have a high enough awareness at this point to see those thoughts and understand that those thoughts are not me, and this idea that they have of my small self, little I, that's not me either. And those thoughts, that false self, I'm not trying to destroy it. I'm just leaving it all alone. And just being what I am. Which is all that I have ever been. But, reversal to all of these points is that, I do think that small self, even if it is a relative, not universally true self, I think is pretty cool.